Have you got bindweed running amok in your garden? Is it popping up all over your beds like whack-a-mole and strangling your plants like how a python strangles its prey?
Well, you're not alone. We've been pulling our hair out, trying to keep this savage beast under wraps all summer. But with the right strategy and enough persistence, there are ways we can rid ourselves of this horrible weed. Since moving to this more rural part of Sheffield last winter, we've been watching the garden gradually reveal what's growing here. One plant caught my eye, a climber with delicate heart-shaped leaves gently winding its way up the back of this fence. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. I took a photo to identify it, thinking it might be something worth keeping, and then I realised what it was: bindweed. An invasive menace that you don't want anywhere near your garden. This is what bindweed looks like when it's a youngling. Distinctive pointed leaves that grow from a wiry stem. Once this bad boy starts to grow, you'll notice it wrapping itself tightly around anything it can grab hold of, usually the stems of your beloved plants. It's really not fussy about what it chokes.
Unfortunately, it's not just confined to one border. We found it coming up all over the place. It's in our raised beds, it's in our flower borders, it's even in our nightmares. Let us know in the comments how much bindweed you've got in your garden. Now, the tricky thing about this beastly plant is that it spreads in two ways. First, it spreads through seed if you let it go to flower, which you should most definitely avoid at all costs. This is probably how it's made its way far and wide in our garden. It's even popping up all the way over there in our front garden. The second way, and this is probably the most damaging, is it has these creeping root system called rhizomes, which can extend several meters underground. Basically, if you let it, it will spread everywhere in your garden, tunnelling underground and coming up where it's most unwanted. I mean, look at it. It's all over these raised beds, it's in our flower borders, it's over by the compost bins, it's even on the other side of the garden. We feel invaded. Now, you might think, well, just pull it out like a thistle and it will be gone. And unfortunately, it's not really as easy as that. This root system here is a real cheeky bugger. When pulling it out by hand, it tends to easily snap, and any tiny fragment of root left in the soil can regenerate into a new plant. So even if you think you've cleared it, any tiny morsel that is left is going to rear its ugly head somewhere else, making it almost immune to casual weeding. The other thing is, because bindweed is perennial, it doesn't die back completely in winter. These roots just wait it out and ready to explode with new growth in spring, and by midsummer it's really in its element. If we don't get a handle on it early, we can find ourselves absolutely swamped. I gave this bed a really thorough weeding just last weekend, and already it's popping up all over the place. One of its absolute favourite spots is at the back of the bed where the fencing is, so we can grow up and coil around our tomato plants and absolutely devour them. But as you can see, it's really not fussy about where it comes up. So that brings us to the real question: how do you actually get rid of bindweed once it's already established?
The first thing we'll say is really not a good idea to use weed killer to get rid of it, as tempting as that might be. Not only can it harm surrounding plants and wildlife, but bindweed has such an extensive root system that spraying the leaves doesn't always reach the real problem underground. Plus, if you're growing food nearby, you don't want to be drenching the soil in chemicals. That leaves us with two options. The first is to dig it out carefully and patiently. But remember, any tiny amount of root left in the soil will happily regrow into a brand new plant. So we need to be methodical and try and remove as much of the root as possible. It will continue to pop up over and over, but gradually, with enough persistence, the regular digging and removal of the leaves, stems and roots will prevent the plant from photosynthesizing and sending energy back down into the root system, gradually weakening it. It's not a quick fix, but if you can stay on top of it, digging alone can eventually deplete the bindweed enough to get it under control and prevent it from smothering whatever it has snaked around. We don't want to redo this whole bed yet again, so for now it's a case of getting on with regular weeding to stay on top of it and stop those twining steps from throttling everything else.
So this is a piece of bindweed that we pulled out earlier, and as you can see, it has quite the extensive root system, doesn't it? So we need to make sure we get as much of this out as possible. If we don't, then it tends to multiply in the soil. But it won't be perfect. There probably will be a couple of bits left, but just have to try and do your best. So I've got some bindweed down here that is threatening to take over this huge area here. So I've got my handy trowel. So I'm going to take, this is probably all interconnected, these 3 bits that have sprouted up. But I'm going to do my best to try and dig it out as much as possible. So I like to go in nice and deep, like so, as deep as I can, and then just try and lift the soil up, and then try and get this out. So there's one piece. Looks like it might have broken off by the end, but it can't be helped really. So there's the next bit over here. This one looks like a nice juicy long one. Yeah. It's so brittle, this stuff. I could feel it breaking at the base, but that's quite a nice long bit that I've got there. So I can, if I wanted to, dig in more to see if I can find the bits that broke off, like that piece there. So that piece of rhizome will probably grow on to be another plant. That's how sneaky this stuff is. So there's a nice big chunky bit there. So we need to make sure we get bits like that out. So there's another piece here. As far down as I can go. There's another piece. So there's a real network of roots under the soil. And like I say, it's going to be tricky to get absolutely every piece out, but the more you dig it up and the more you get the bits that you can see out, then the more that's going to weaken the plant over the long run. So I think I've got most of that out.
Option 2 is what we try to do in this bed and deprive the bindweed of the sunlight it needs to photosynthesize by covering it with a thick layer of something. If you're a subscriber to the channel, then you would have seen us revamping this bed using the NoDig method, which begins by laying down cardboard to suppress weed. This is actually a really good way of suppressing weeds, even bindweed, but we made a mistake. Most of the plants here are newly planted, but the mistake we made was trying to work around a few established plants that we wanted to keep. We didn't want to cover the whole bed. Bindweed spotted that weakness and pushed up right through the gaps around the lungwort and wild geraniums that we'd left in place. In hindsight, we should have lifted everything and covered the whole bed properly with cardboard, topped it up with a really thick layer of compost, and then replanted everything as new. This means there wouldn't be obvious gaps in the armour for the bindweed to penetrate.
We have the same problem in this vegetable bed here, and for the time being we're doing our best to prevent it from destroying our crops. It's having a real good go at wrapping itself around the onion tops. So we gave these beds a full refresh back in late winter. After a thorough weeding, we added our soil mix on top, but didn't think about adding a barrier underneath. As the bindweed would have been dormant at that point, we had no idea that the beds were teeming with the stuff below the surface. If we'd known, we would have taken the opportunity to tackle it properly while the beds were still empty. But we didn't know what we were dealing with. The nuclear option is to use black plastic sheeting. This won't biodegrade like cardboard and will do a really good job at completely blocking out the light. If you really wanted to do a number on it, you could completely reset your bed by covering it with the black plastic sheeting and then a thick layer of compost and then leaving it until next year. Keep coming back to see if any are popping up and then remove as often as you can. The problem with that, of course, is that you're using plastic in the garden and we're not so keen on that. It's not really good for wildlife. In these vegetable beds that are covered in bindweed, the onions seem to have coped okay, but we haven't had too much joy with the garlic and carrots, as you can see. It might be nothing to do with the bindweed, but they're most certainly not happy. Now that the onions are ready to harvest, we're going to call time on this bed for this year to try and get this bindweed under control once and for all. For that, we're going to use a double or even triple layer of cardboard with compost on top. Now, it won't die off instantly, but over time, with no energy going back to the roots, it should start to weaken. Hopefully, that will give us a better starting point for next season.
We've shown you a few bits of our garden today, and if you want to have a proper nosy, watch our full tour by clicking on the video now.